She always did the right thing, even when no one noticed. Emily Carter was the kind of woman who offered her seat on the bus, held the door for strangers, and remembered birthdays no one else did. Yet, the world barely saw her. Customers at the cafe ordered coffee without meeting her eyes. Neighbors nodded politely but never invited her in. Then, one rainy afternoon, something happened. As she walked home under a shared gray sky, she saw an elderly man collapse on the sidewalk. People hurried past him. Some glanced, none stopped. Emily didn't hesitate. She knelt beside him, shielding him from the rain with her thin coat. She didn't know that man was someone powerful. She didn't know her small act of kindness was about to shatter everything the world thought it knew about her. But in that quiet moment, soaked to the skin, heart pounding, she proved who she truly was. And the world would never ignore her again. Emily Carter's life moved like the tide, gentle, steady, unseen. At 28, she worked 6 days a week at a seaside cafe where the smell of salt blended with fresh espresso. Every morning at 6:00 a.m., she unlocked the front door, tied her apron, and smiled at regulars who barely glanced up from their phones. She lived alone in a small upstairs apartment above a bookstore that was always closed on Sundays. Her walls were lined with secondhand novels and faded photos of her mother who had passed when Emily was 20. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock in the kitchen and the soft hum of an old refrigerator. Dinner was usually simple soup from a can, half a loaf of bread. Sometimes she lit a candle just to make the silence feel less empty. People called her kind, reliable, sweet but plain. But behind the polite smiles and small talk, no one ever asked about her dreams, or her grief, or her quiet hope that one day someone might actually see her. That morning, like most others, Emily swept the cafe floor before sunrise. A soft ache pulsed in her lower back, the result of standing too long the day before, but she didn't complain. She never did. She rubbed her side gently and continued wiping the counter, humming to herself as the sky outside turned from deep blue to gold. A customer entered, nodded, and ordered without making eye contact. "No foam," he snapped, correcting her before she'd even poured the milk. Emily simply nodded, offering a soft, "Of course," with a tired but sincere smile. Later, while taking out the trash, she passed a neighbor on the stairs. The woman quickly looked away as if avoiding small talk with someone beneath her. Emily forced a smile anyway. She always did. Her phone vibrated. A message from her cousin. "Sorry, can't talk. Swamped." It had been months since they last spoke. Back in her apartment, Emily reheated leftovers. She sat at the tiny table by the window alone, watching the world move on without her. The light in her apartment flickered, then steadied. Emily made a mental note, pay the electric bill again. Last month's had arrived higher than expected, and she'd quietly skipped her weekly grocery splurge to cover it. No one knew. No one asked. That night, she tried to mend a tear in her coat. It was the same one she'd worn since college. Threading the needle took effort, her fingers trembling slightly after hours of work. She squinted, struggling in the dim light, then sighed as the thread slipped free for the third time. On the wall behind her, a photograph of her and her mother smiled down. It had been taken on a summer picnic years ago. Emily touched the frame gently, whispering, "You'd laugh at this, huh?" Outside, laughter echoed from the street below, young voices carefree and loud. Emily looked out the window, watching a group of friends sharing takeout and stories. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, quiet, still forgotten. She turned away before the ache could settle too deep. The next morning at the cafe, Emily placed a small basket of fresh muffins by the register with a handwritten sign, "Free today. Just because." She had used her own money to make them, waking up an hour early to bake. By noon, the basket was empty. No one said thank you. A few customers assumed it was a promotion from management. One woman even asked, "Do you think they'll do this again tomorrow?" Emily smiled, nodded, and returned to wiping down tables. Later, a coworker whispered to another, "She tries too hard. It's kind of desperate, don't you think?" They didn't know she could hear. She didn't respond. That evening, Emily passed a street musician shivering in the cold. She paused, dropped a folded $5 bill into his case, and offered her scarf. He looked up surprised. "Are you sure?" She smiled. "You need it more than I do." And without waiting for gratitude, she disappeared into the crowd, just another face the city didn't see. That night, Emily returned home to the quiet hum of solitude. She placed her keys on the hook by the door, kicked off her worn shoes, and stood for a moment in the stillness. No voices, no messages waiting, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the faint creak of old floorboards. She reheated leftover lentil soup and sat at her usual spot by the window. The street outside was dim, lit only by flickering lamps and passing headlights. She took a sip, but the food tasted dull like her day. On impulse, she picked up her phone and opened her contacts. Her thumb hovered over a name, Aunt Diane. She hadn't called in months. Maybe tonight. She tapped call. The phone rang once, twice. Voicemail. "Hi, it's me. Just checking in. I hope you're doing okay." She paused, hoping for words that wouldn't come, then hung up before the beep. The room fell silent again. She stared out the window soup, untouched heart just a little heavier. Unable to sleep, Emily pulled out an old box from under her bed, its corner's frayed lid barely holding on. Inside were small mementos, faded postcards, pressed flowers, and a journal she hadn't opened in years. She flipped through the pages slowly. Her handwriting curved gently across lines filled with dreams, once bright and untouched. Start my own book cafe. Travel to Kyoto with Mom, host a neighborhood open mic night. Many of those dreams had quietly curled into silence like paper yellowing with time. One loose photo slipped out, a snapshot of her and her mother, arms linked, standing beside a flower stall. Both were laughing mid-blink. Emily traced her mother's smile with her thumb. "I miss you," she whispered. A tear fell, blotting the ink of a note scribbled beside the photo. "Mom says kindness never goes unnoticed, even when it looks like it does." Emily closed the box gently and placed it back under her bed. She turned off the light. But long after she lay awake in the dark, holding that memory like a match in the cold. Morning came with a dull ache in her shoulders, the kind that lingered without drama, just enough to remind her of another day ahead. Emily brewed a cup of tea instead of coffee, hoping the warmth might shake off the tiredness in her bones. She glanced at her phone. No missed calls, no new messages. Dressing in her usual jeans and navy sweater, she tucked her hair behind her ears, looked at herself in the mirror, and forced a small smile. Let's try again. At the cafe, the rush came early. Orders stacked up, a spill behind the counter, a broken milk frother. Still, Emily moved quietly, efficiently, never raising her voice, never showing strain. "Emily, can you cover Martha's shift this weekend?" her manager asked without looking up from the tablet. Of course, she answered softly, though her only day off would now disappear. That evening, walking home under a fading sun, she passed a storefront window and saw her own reflection. Tired eyes, hunched shoulders, but still standing. No applause, no recognition. But there she was, still kind, still trying. The sky darkened earlier than usual. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, and by late afternoon rain began to fall, first a whisper, then a steady cold sheet. Emily finished her shift and stepped outside, tugging her hood over her head. Her shoes were already damp from puddles forming at the curb. Most people hurried past her, eyes down, umbrellas up, lost in their own haste. As she turned the corner toward home, she saw him. An elderly man, soaked to the skin, sat slumped against a bench. His hands trembled. One shoe was missing. A few people passed, some glanced, none stopped. Emily did. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked gently, kneeling beside him despite the rain. His lips moved, but no words came. She took off her coat and draped it over his shoulders, shielding him as best she could. "Let me help," she whispered. She didn't know his name, didn't care what he had. She just knew no one should be left alone in the rain. Emily guided the man slowly, carefully toward the nearby cafe. Her arms steadied his trembling frame as rain poured around them, soaking her to the bone. She didn't flinch, didn't rush, just matched his slow, uncertain steps with quiet patience. Inside, the warmth was a blessing. She led him to a corner booth, fetched a clean towel from the back, and placed it gently over his shoulders. Then she brewed him a cup of chamomile tea, hot with a touch of honey. He looked at her wide-eyed as if unsure whether this was real. "Drink slowly," she said softly, sitting across from him, dripping wet but calm. Customers in the cafe glanced their way, some curious, some judgmental, but no one said a word. Emily ignored them all. She focused only on the man in front of her. No cameras, no heroics, just kindness, steady and real. And for the first time that day, the man smiled. It was small-tired, but full of gratitude words couldn't reach. As the man sipped his tea, his hands steadied slightly. Emily didn't press him with questions. She simply sat there, offering her presence as a quiet anchor in the noise of the world. A few customers murmured disapprovingly whispers about bringing strangers in and safety concerns. The manager raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Emily glanced at the man's shoes, only one on his feet, the other soaked and torn beside him. His coat was threadbare, his face worn from time, maybe from life itself. Still, his eyes held something familiar: exhaustion, and perhaps embarrassment. She gently pushed a warm muffin across the table toward him. "Please," she said. He hesitated, then nodded slowly, tearing a piece off with trembling fingers. She took a breath. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" He shook his head. "Then let me call an ambulance, just to make sure you're all right." His lips parted, barely audible. "Thank you." Emily smiled softly. "You're welcome. I'm glad I found you." The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later, lights flashing softly in the drizzle. Emily stayed by the man's side until the medics entered, speaking in calm, practiced tones. He looked up at her one last time, eyes glassy but focused now, and reached out a frail hand. She took it without hesitation, squeezing gently. "Don't worry," she said. "You're safe now." He didn't give a name, didn't explain where he came from, just nodded a silent thank you etched deep in the lines of his face. As the stretcher wheeled him out into the rain, he looked back at her once more. There was something in his expression like recognition or maybe quiet awe. Then he was gone. Emily stood by the window for a moment, watching the ambulance disappear into the gray. Her coat was still damp, her hair clung to her neck, but her heart felt strangely light. She didn't know who he was or if she'd ever see him again, but that didn't matter. She'd helped someone who needed it, and for her, that was enough. The next morning, the cafe looked exactly the same. Sunlight slipping through foggy windows, the hum of the espresso machine, the clatter of ceramic mugs. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. Emily arrived early as always. She hung up her coat, tied her apron, and started prepping the pastry case. No one mentioned the night before. No one asked why she came in late or why her shoes were still slightly damp. To them, she was just Emily, the quiet barista, always there, always polite. She took comfort in routine. It was safe, predictable, but a flicker of thought lingered in her mind: the man's face, his worn eyes, the way he'd looked at her, not like she was invisible, but like she mattered. As she poured coffee for a regular, he barely nodded. Another customer waved off her greeting with a distracted phone call. The usual rhythm of being seen, but not really noticed, resumed. Still, a part of her felt changed. And though no one else knew it, Emily had made a difference. Even if no one saw, the afternoon lull came with the usual quiet. Emily wiped down the counter, humming softly to herself when the bell above the door chimed. A man stepped in, well-dressed, mid-40s, with a quiet air of confidence. He glanced around the cafe, eyes scanning the room, then walked up to the register. He said, voice calm, "I'm looking for someone." Emily straightened slightly. "Sure, who are you looking for?" He hesitated. "She brought an older man in from the rain yesterday, sat with him, helped him." Emily blinked. "That was me." The man studied her as if trying to reconcile her with whatever image he'd been given. "You." She nodded. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." Emily took it, confused. There was no name on the front, just her in soft handwriting. From who, she asked. But the man only smiled, eyes kind. He said you'd understand. Then without another word, he turned and left. Emily stood frozen for a moment, envelope in hand, heart tapping a little faster. She walked to the back room away from the low hum of customers and clinking mugs and slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper. The handwriting was neat, elegant. To the young woman who saw me when no one else did, it began. You didn't ask my name. You didn't ask what I had or what I'd lost. You just helped. Without judgment, without hesitation. That kind of kindness is rare. You gave me warmth when I felt invisible, and for that I owe you more than thanks. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she turned to the next page. A card slipped out, simple, silver-embossed, bearing the name Harold Bennett. She stared at it, her breath catching. The name sounded familiar, very familiar. But before she could fully process it, her eyes fell on the final line of the letter. Someone like you shouldn't be hidden in the background forever. She looked up, dazed. Outside, the clouds were breaking. A patch of sun slipped through. The name Harold Bennett echoed in Emily's mind as she sat behind the counter letter pressed gently between her palms. She wasn't one to follow headlines, but even she had heard of him, a reclusive billionaire known less for public appearances and more for quiet acts of extraordinary generosity. Rumors said he funded anonymous grants, saved dying hospitals, even paid off strangers' debts. And now... He had written to her. She picked up the business card again. It was heavier than it looked, like it carried meaning beyond its size. Her manager called from the front, snapping her out of the moment. "Emily, you okay back there?" She tucked the letter into her apron pocket and stepped out, her voice steady. "Yes, just a little lightheaded. I'm all right." But inside, her world had tilted. Why would someone like him, someone powerful, untouchable, care about someone like her? She returned to the register, taking orders as if everything were the same. But everything had changed, even if no one else saw it yet. That evening, long after the cafe closed and the last chair had been turned upside down, Emily sat at her small kitchen table with the letter open again in front of her. A second page had been folded neatly inside one she hadn't noticed at first. It was an invitation. "If you are willing, I'd like to meet. Tomorrow. Noon. The Roslyn Hotel Suite, 803. HB." Emily reread it 3 times. Her fingers hovered above her phone. Call, decline. Ignore. She poured herself a cup of tea instead. Steam curled upward like a question mark. The Roslyn was the most exclusive hotel in town, the kind of place where people like her didn't walk through the front door without being asked if they were lost. The idea of going made her stomach flutter, half with nerves, half disbelief. She looked down at her chipped mug, her thrifted sweater, the quiet apartment around her. Then she folded the letter, stood slowly, and whispered to herself, "What if, just this once, someone truly saw me?" And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The next day, Emily stood in front of the towering glass doors of the Roslyn Hotel. Her reflection staring back, plain coat, modest dress, clean but unremarkable. She smoothed her hair nervously and exhaled. The doorman offered a polite nod, but his eyes flicked over her with mild skepticism. "Can I help you, miss?" "Yes," Emily said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "I have a meeting. Suite 803. He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Elevators are to your left." The lobby gleamed marble floors, golden chandeliers, soft piano music floating like perfume. Emily felt out of place like a paper flower among roses, but she kept walking. In the elevator, her hands fidgeted. The doors opened at the 8th floor with a soft chime. She stepped out, counted the doors, and paused at 803. For a second, she considered leaving, but something stronger kept her rooted, a quiet resolve born not from pride but from years of being overlooked. She knocked. The door opened almost instantly, and Harold Bennett was standing there smiling. Harold Bennett wasn't what she expected. He wore no suit, no tie, just a soft gray sweater, slacks, and kindness in his eyes. His posture was gentle, not grand, and when he spoke his voice was low, warm, and steady. "Ms. Carter," he said, motioning her inside. "Thank you for coming." Emily stepped into the suite, unsure of what to say. The room was elegant, but not flashy bookshelves, a tea set, fresh flowers. It felt lived in. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he continued. "I almost didn't," she admitted, clutching her purse with both hands. "I thought maybe it was a mistake, that you sent the letter to the wrong person." Harold smiled. "No mistake. I never forget a face, especially one that knelt beside a stranger in the rain with nothing to gain." Emily blushed, unsure how to respond. "I'd like to talk with you," he said, motioning toward a chair near the window. "Not as a test, just a conversation." She nodded slowly and sat the city stretching out behind her through the glass. For once, someone wasn't looking past her. They were looking in. Harold poured tea into delicate china cups and handed one to Emily. His movements were unhurried, intentional, like someone used to silence and weighty thoughts. "You remind me of someone I once knew," he began, settling into the chair across from her. "A woman who believed the world could be healed by small kindnesses." Everyone laughed at her, until she proved them wrong. Emily looked down her fingers, tracing the rim of the cup. "I don't know if I'm like that. I just didn't want him to be alone. That's exactly why you are." Harold leaned forward, eyes sharp with sincerity. "I've spent years building things, companies, systems, walls. But what you did, that was different. You gave freely, instinctively, without hesitation." She hesitated. "It didn't feel like much, but it was," he said firmly. "You stopped. You noticed. You acted. That's rare, Emily." She blinked, startled by the sound of her name said with such weight, as if it finally meant something. He reached into a drawer and slid a small folder across the table. "I want to offer you something. Not a reward. A beginning." Emily stared at the folder, unsure whether to touch it. It sat here, like something too delicate or too powerful to open without trembling. Harold's voice remained calm but steady. "Inside is a proposal. Funding. Space. Staff. Everything needed to build something of your own." She blinked. "What kind of—" "Something a center," he replied. "For people like you, people who fall through the cracks, who give and give yet are never seen. A place of warmth, safety, dignity. You decide the shape. The heart is already there. It's you." Emily's breath caught. Her fingers brushed the folder's edge. "But—" "Why me?" she whispered. "I'm not special. I'm just a woman who knelt in the rain for a stranger when everyone else walked by," he interrupted gently. "And you didn't do it to be noticed. That's exactly why you were." Silence stretched for a beat, then Emily opened the folder. Inside, blueprints, a modest budget, a letter of intent. Everything real. "I don't need a yes right now," Harold said softly. "But I hope you'll consider what the world might look like with more of your kind of kindness leading it." Emily looked up. Something inside her shifted. Quietly, but unmistakably. Emily walked home beneath a sky streaked with the colors of late afternoon soft amber fading blue. The hush before evening settled in. The folder was tucked securely under her arm, but the weight she felt wasn't paper. It was possibility. Her mind raced with doubts. Could I really do this? Build something? Lead anything? She wasn't a leader. She was just the girl behind the counter, the one everyone forgot. But Harold hadn't forgotten her. He'd remembered everything. Back in her apartment, she laid the folder on the kitchen table beside her chipped mug and thrifted tea tin. Slowly, she flipped through the pages again. A layout of rooms labeled Community Kitchen, Quiet Library, Mentorship Office. Scribbled notes in Harold's handwriting. A safe place for those who give too much. She touched the page gently. A center like this could change lives. She stood by the window watching lights flicker on across the city. For once, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. And for the first time in years, Emily whispered aloud, "I think I know what I'm meant to do." The next morning, Emily returned to the cafe, but something was different. Not the place, not the people, but her. She moved through the motions brewing coffee greeting customers, but her thoughts weren't trapped in routine anymore. They stretched beyond the counter, beyond the cafe walls, into a vision she could finally begin to imagine. When her break came, she stepped outside, folder in hand, and sat on a bench beneath a tree just beginning to bloom. She opened to a blank page at the back, and she began to write. Not about herself, but about others. The young woman she saw each day walking past with a bruised arm and tired eyes. The man who came in every Thursday always ordering the cheapest thing on the menu, counting his coins with shaky fingers. The high school kid who never spoke but lingered by the bulletin board as if hoping someone would see him. She wrote their names, or at least the names she gave them in her mind. Because this center, it wouldn't be for her. It would be for them, for everyone who lived quietly, gave quietly, hurt quietly, and now maybe could heal. That evening, as twilight crept over the city, Emily sat at her kitchen table with Harold's folder open in front of her. A blank email waited on her laptop screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She'd spent the day listening to the quiet between orders, to the way people sighed when no one was watching, to the subtle sadness and laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. And she knew this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a calling. She began typing slowly, deliberately. Dear Mr. Bennett, thank you for believing in someone like me. I accept your offer with one condition. I don't want this center to carry my name. I don't want it to celebrate me. I want it to belong to the people it's built for, those who have been overlooked, silenced, dismissed. It should be their light, not mine. Let's build something that reminds them they've always mattered. She hit send. And for the first time in her life, Emily didn't feel small for being humble. She felt powerful for being kind. Days passed quietly. No news cameras, no articles, no sudden flood of followers. And that was exactly how Emily wanted it. The plans moved forward in silent site visits, budget reviews, calls with Harold's quietly efficient team. They respected her vision, listened more than they spoke. No one tried to brand her. No one tried to dress her up. One afternoon, she stood alone in front of an old brick building on the edge of town, a space Harold had already purchased. It was worn but sturdy. Windows, boarded walls, weathered by time, but it had potential, a future. She stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the afternoon light. The air smelled of age and wood and waiting. She closed her eyes and imagined it filled with life, laughter echoing off fresh paint hands shaping bookshelves, voices rising in hope. Not a charity. A home. And as she stood in the empty space, hands in her coat pockets, she whispered, "Let it begin." Emily sat cross-legged on her living room floor, papers and sticky notes scattered around her like fallen petals. Her old notebook lay open, pages filled with hand-drawn sketches. Ideas for community spaces, quiet rooms, reading corners, a garden out back. She wasn't an architect, but she knew how people moved when they were tired. How silence could feel heavy in the wrong room or healing in the right one. She drew windows facing east for morning light, benches tucked into corners for solitude, tables big enough for shared meals but small enough to feel intimate. Each room had a purpose. Each corner a story. At the top of one page, she wrote, "What would have helped me?" that became her guide. Not what looked good, not what impressed donors, but what made someone breathe easier, feel safe, feel seen. Because this place would not be a monument to her kindness. It would be a mirror reflecting the quiet strength of those who'd survived invisibility just like she had. Word spread slowly, not through headlines or billboards, but through conversations. One person told another. A social worker mentioned it in passing. A teacher slipped a flyer into a student's folder. There was no grand launch, no viral video. Just a simple message, "A space is coming," for those who feel forgotten. Volunteers appeared, some shy, some eager. A retired carpenter offered to restore the windows. A teen who'd dropped out of school showed up with paint-stained hands saying he just wanted to help. Emily welcomed them all, no questions asked. She worked alongside them, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, a quiet fire in her step. People began to notice this wasn't a charity run from above. This was something different. One afternoon, someone asked, "What will it be called?" Emily thought for a moment, then smiled. Hope Haven. A place where kindness wasn't an exception but a rhythm. Where healing didn't come with a spotlight but with a door quietly opening. It wasn't just a center. It was the beginning of something far bigger than herself. Hope Haven opened its doors without ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just a handwritten sign in the window. "Come in, you're welcome here." The first to arrive was a young woman with a toddler on her hip and worry in her eyes. Emily met her at the door with a smile and a warm cup of tea. "You're safe here," she said gently. Next came a boy no older than 16, silent and withdrawn. He didn't say a word, just sat by the bookshelf for hours tracing his fingers over the spines. No one pushed. No one pried. He came back the next day. By the end of the first week, the once empty building was filled with quiet footsteps, hushed conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter. Someone brought muffins. Someone else left a note on the wall. "This place feels like a hug I didn't know I needed." Emily stood in the corner watching it all. Not as a leader towering above, but as someone among them, one more voice in the room, one more light in the warm, growing glow. Hope had taken root, and it was already blooming. A week later, a woman walked through the doors of Hope Haven with hesitation in her step and guilt in her eyes. It was Mrs. Langley, a regular from the cafe. She had once whispered about Emily's muffins being a little sad and had never learned her name. Now she held a tray of cookies, homemade and slightly burnt around the edges. "I thought maybe the kids might like these," she murmured, eyes not quite meeting Emily's. Emily smiled gently. "They will. Thank you for bringing them." Later that day, a man dropped off a stack of gently used books, textbooks, novels, poetry anthologies. It was Mr. Weaver, the customer, who never said hello. "I figured someone might read them here," he said, voice awkward. Emily nodded. "They'll mean more than you know." They didn't apologize. They didn't have to. Because by showing up by giving back, they were beginning to understand. The woman they once overlooked had built something they now needed. And they were being welcomed anyway with no resentment, only warmth. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a girl arrived at Hope Haven, soaked through her yellow backpack, dripping onto the floor. She looked no older than 10, her eyes wary and wide beneath a tangled curtain of wet hair. Emily knelt to her level, offering a towel and a gentle voice. "Hey there. You all right?" The girl didn't answer, just clutched her backpack tighter. "It's warm inside," Emily said. "You don't have to talk. You can just sit if you want." The girl hesitated, then nodded. Emily led her to a beanbag chair in the reading nook, handed her a soft blanket and a cookie. From a distance, she watched as the girl slowly unzipped her backpack, revealing soaked notebooks, a bruised apple, and a picture of her family folded in quarters. She didn't speak all day. But when she left, she turned at the door and whispered, "Thank you." It was barely audible. But to Emily, it was everything. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with words. It begins with being seen. Hope Haven had no loud slogans, no mission statement carved in stone. Yet something powerful was spreading like ripples from a stone, dropped gently in still water. A single mother started showing up to cook on weekends, preparing warm meals from family recipes. "I haven't cooked for anyone in years," she said softly, ladling soup into mismatched bowls. A retired music teacher dusted off his old violin and began offering lessons to kids after school. "They don't need to be perfect," he said. "They just need to feel heard." Even the boy from the bookshelf began reading aloud to others, shaky at first, but stronger each day. "Can I try reading this one next time?" he asked, holding up a thick, wrinkled fantasy novel. Emily didn't lead with a spotlight. She led by listening, by noticing, by reminding people they mattered. And every day more people entered quietly, some looking for help, others looking to help. It was never loud. But kindness doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stay. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the Hope Haven lobby, The front door creaked open and Emily looked up to see a face she hadn't seen in years. Aunt Diane. She stood in the doorway, older than Emily remembered, with a scarf wound too tightly around her neck and something uncertain in her eyes. They stared at each other for a long second. Two people who had once shared holidays, grief, and then distance. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Diane said, voice quiet, "but I heard, and I thought maybe it was time." Emily's heart beat hard. There were so many words she'd wanted to say over the years, but now none of them came. Instead, she stepped forward and opened her arms. Diane hesitated, then stepped into the embrace. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even complete, but it was a beginning. Hope Haven didn't just welcome strangers. It brought the broken pieces of family back to the table without pressure, without pride, just presence. And sometimes that was enough. One morning, as Emily arrived early to tidy the main room, she noticed something new pinned to the community bulletin board, a single sheet of lined paper folded once with her name written at the top in uneven handwriting. She unfolded it carefully. "Dear Miss Emily, I come here after school. I don't talk much. I thought no one saw me. But you always smiled. You remembered my name. No one ever does. I wanted to disappear before. Now I want to come back tomorrow. I hope you never stop being here, from someone who's not invisible anymore." Emily stared at the words, her throat-tight fingers trembling slightly as she refolded the page and pinned it back. She didn't know who had written it, but she didn't need to. Because this was why Hope Haven existed, not for grand gestures or recognition, but for moments like this, where one quiet soul reached another and said, "I see you too." The sun was setting, casting warm streaks of orange through the tall windows of Hope Haven. Emily stood alone in the community room, the same space that had once echoed with emptiness and dust. Now it hummed with quiet life. A mural stretched across the far wall, painted by volunteers' colorful hands reaching toward a rising sun. Beneath it, a table was covered in art supplies, paper cranes, half-finished puzzles. Laughter floated from the kitchen. The smell of something cinnamon-sweet lingered in the air. In one corner, a group of teenagers were helping a shy boy with homework. In another, an elderly woman softly read poetry aloud to herself. Emily closed her eyes, listening not just to the sounds, but to the feel of it all. This room, once still and cold, now breathed. She remembered sitting on this floor months ago, surrounded by nothing but blueprints and questions. And now, it was more than she had dreamed. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Hope, after all, doesn't arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it walks in quietly and stays. That evening, after everyone had gone and the lights dimmed to their soft nighttime glow, Emily lingered in the quiet. She made herself a cup of tea and climbed the narrow stairs to her small office above the main room. The window overlooked the street, same view she'd passed for years on her way to and from the cafe. But tonight, it looked different. Or maybe she did. She sat by the window, steam rising from her mug, and opened a small wooden box on her desk. Inside were old photographs, keepsakes, and a worn letter. It was from her mother, the last one she'd written before her illness took the words away. "You were always meant to be light, Em, even if no one looks. Shine anyway." Emily smiled, tears stinging her eyes. She looked out at the street below, quiet, sleepy, ordinary. But somewhere in that stillness, lives had shifted. Not in headlines or history books, but in hearts. And she realized the woman who once felt invisible had become the reason others now felt seen. The soft ring of her phone broke the quiet. Emily blinked, startled. It was late. Almost no one called her this hour. She picked it up, hesitating for a second before answering. "Hello?" A familiar voice came through, tentative, a little raspy with age. "Emily. It's Mrs. Alvarez, from the apartment building. Years ago." Emily sat up straighter, surprised. "Mrs. Alvarez? Wow! How are you?" There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. old and slower but still here. I heard about what you've built, Hope Haven. A neighbor forwarded me something on Facebook. I didn't believe it was you at first. Emily laughed gently. It's me. I just wanted to say, the woman continued, voice softening, you always helped people, even back then, even when you had nothing. I remember the groceries you left at my door when I was sick. I never said thank you. Emily blinked back a tear. You didn't have to. Another pause. Well, I'm saying it now. The line was quiet after they said goodbye, but Emily held the phone to her chest for a long moment. Sometimes kindness echoes years later and finds its way home. The next evening unfolded like so many before it, soft lamplight, the murmur of gentle conversation, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Emily moved through Hope Haven with ease, checking in on everyone. She helped a boy tie his shoelaces, reminded a woman about a doctor's appointment, and taped up a new flyer on the wall. Story night. Share something, or just listen. Nothing extraordinary happened, and yet everything did. A volunteer handed her a cup of tea without asking how she liked it because now they knew. A little honey, no milk. Someone had written a note on the whiteboard by the entrance. This place makes me want to try again. Emily read it, then quietly erased it, not to remove it, but to make space for the next message. As she walked past the front door, she paused. She remembered standing there the first day they opened. Nervous, unsure. Now she walked not with hesitation, but with belonging. The girl who once stood outside the world had built a door wide enough for everyone, including herself. Just before closing, as Emily swept the common room, she noticed a small package resting on the edge of the bookshelf, unlabeled, wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. She looked around. No one claimed it. Most had already gone home. Curious, she untied the string and peeled back the paper. Inside was a book. Not just any book, an old, well-loved copy of Little Women, its spine cracked, corners worn. On the inside cover, a note had been handwritten for Emily, who reminds us all of Jo March. Not because she wanted to be noticed, but because she couldn't help but care. Thank you for reminding me that softness is strength. No signature, just those words. Emily held the book close, heart full. So many years she had walked through life quietly unnoticed. Now her presence had become something others carried with them, even anonymously, even silently. She placed the book on the shelf near the reading nook, front-facing its pages already familiar. Because some gifts aren't meant to be kept, they're meant to be shared. That night, Emily walked home under a quiet sky, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. The streets shimmered with leftover holiday lights, some flickering, some steady, like hearts learning to hope again. When she reached her apartment, she paused outside the door. Everything looked the same, but she knew it wasn't. Inside, she changed into pajamas, made a cup of tea, and pulled out her wooden box again. She added the note from the book, carefully folding it alongside the letter from Harold, the photo of her mother, and the old postcard from Aunt Diane. Each piece was a thread in the story she'd woven, one of quiet resilience, steady kindness, and 100 small moments that became something whole. She sat by the window just as she had so many nights before, only this time her phone buzzed with new names, new voices, new life. A voice message blinked. You made a difference today. Emily smiled, not because she'd finally been seen, but because now so many others had too. Hope Haven never made the evening news. It never went viral. No awards, no ribbon cuttings, no headlines. But it changed everything, one person at a time. It became a place where kindness wasn't asked for, it was assumed. Where being quiet wasn't seen as weakness, and where the invisible were not just seen but welcomed, celebrated, and empowered. And at the heart of it all was Emily Carter. Not with a spotlight, not on a stage, but beside someone folding laundry, sitting beside a teenager in silence, or holding an old man's trembling hand. She never sought recognition. That was never the point. She just kept showing up. And in doing so, she reminded people of something most of the world had forgotten, that dignity doesn't come from wealth, that strength can be soft, that kindness, steady, unshaken, unseen, is a force that rewrites lives. In a world obsessed with being loud, Emily proved that quiet could still echo, far and forever. If this story moved you, share it. Or, better yet, be someone's hope haven. Subscribe for more stories that remind us the smallest acts still change the world.